The wind was tearing across the prairie that night like it had a personal grudge against every living soul in Dry Creek, and the moon hung pale and crooked in the sky, watching everything with a cold, silent stare that made a body feel small and judged. Widow May Whitaker was sitting alone in her dim cabin, the fire snapping low and tired, her fingers slowly mending an old shirt that once belonged to the husband she had buried 3 winters ago, when suddenly a violent knock exploded against her door and shattered the heavy silence she had grown used to living with. The knock came again, harder this time, desperate enough to rattle the hinges, and a man's voice cracked through the wood, begging for mercy, as if mercy were the last thing left in the whole wide West. When May opened that door with a steady hand and a guarded heart, she found Caleb Turner standing there in the dust and wind, a proud rancher now broken down to nothing but fear, his hat crushed in his trembling hands, and his voice shaking as he begged her for fresh milk to save his dying baby boy. This was the same man who once accused her late husband of stealing water rights, the same man whose harsh words had stained her memories long after. The grave dirt had settled, and for a long moment the night felt like it was holding its breath to see whether she would slam the door or step aside. May looked deep into Caleb's eyes and saw something stronger than pride and heavier than guilt, because she saw the kind of fear that only comes when a parent believes they are about to bury their child before sunrise. Instead of speaking her anger, she turned without a word, fetched a pail, and walked out into the freezing dark toward her barn, where her lone cow shifted softly in the shadows as if sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. Milk struck the tin bucket in steady white streams, while the wind cried through the cracks of the wooden boards. And Caleb stood there, watching that simple act like it was the difference between heaven and hell, when May heard that the baby was not breathing right, and that the fever had burned so high it made his tiny chest rattle, something deep inside her that had been frozen since her husband's death began to thaw with painful clarity. She did not just hand over the milk. She grabbed her coat. She mounted the horse. She rode with the man who had once wronged her. The prairie stretched wide and merciless beneath the moonlight as they galloped toward the Turner Ranch, and the wind cut at May's face like sharp memory, reminding her of the night she had held her own husband while his breath grew thin and slipped away. Inside the Turner home, chaos and grief filled the air, and the baby lay flushed and limp near the fire, his tiny body burning with fever, while his mother wept in helpless terror beside him. May did not hesitate, because grief had already taught her what hesitation costs, and she moved with calm authority as she mixed warm milk with crushed willow bark, rubbed mint oil onto the child's fragile chest, and ordered the fire to be kept steady but not fierce. Then came the moment that steals courage from even the strongest hearts, because the baby's breathing faltered, then stopped altogether, and the silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot ever fired in Dry Creek. The mother screamed. The father collapsed, but May leaned closer, refusing to surrender to the same helplessness that once claimed her husband, and she pressed her steady hands against the child's small body, whispering words that were half prayer and half command. For one endless stretch of time nothing happened, and the only sound was the wind scratching at the windows like fate waiting outside. Then the baby coughed, a weak, wet, stubborn little cough that split the silence wide open. Air rushed back into his lungs like dawn breaking over a long night, and color slowly returned to his cheeks, as if life itself had decided it wasn't finished yet. The mother sobbed in relief. The father dropped his head in humbled gratitude, and May sat back with tears shining quietly in her own eyes, because saving that child had stitched something inside her that she believed was torn beyond repair. Caleb removed his hat and knelt before her, admitting his past wrongs with a voice stripped clean of pride, promising to raise his boy honest and to honor the woman who chose mercy over bitterness when it mattered most. When May finally stepped back into the moonlight to return to her lonely cabin, the wind no longer sounded cruel, and the prairie no longer felt empty. because somewhere behind her a child was breathing steady and alive. From that night forward, Dry Creek remembered what real strength looked like. And it was not the quick draw of a gun or the size of a cattle herd, but the courage to answer a desperate knock with compassion instead of revenge. And the baby who almost died under that crooked moon grew strong in the years that followed, never knowing how close he had come to never seeing another sunrise. While the grieving widow who saved him finally found that mercy can heal wounds that time alone never could. That is how one moonlit ride across a cold prairie turned sorrow into salvation, pride into repentance, and a nearly buried child into a living miracle. And that, right there, is where this story ends.